Marcus Wright was seated at a polished mahogany table in one of the city's most upscale restaurants, where every detail spoke of refinement and luxury. The soft glow of flickering candlelight cast delicate shadows across the meticulously arranged tableware, highlighting the elegance of the setting. The rich aroma of grilled salmon and roasted vegetables wafted through the air, mingling with the mellow strains of soft jazz that floated in the background, creating an ambience that should have been soothing and pleasant. Yet, despite the opulent surroundings, Marcus felt a tight knot of apprehension twisting in his stomach. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. He glanced across the table at his colleague, Sarah, who was deeply engrossed in discussing a recent case they had been working on together. Her eyes were bright with enthusiasm and determination as she outlined her thoughts. If we can leverage the precedent set in Morgan v. State, we might stand a chance at overturning that absurd ruling, Sarah said, her voice filled with conviction. Marcus nodded in agreement, though his attention was split. While he was partially focused on Sarah's passionate discourse, another part of him was acutely aware of the subtle but unsettling behavior of the restaurant staff. They seemed to exchange uneasy glances, and their smiles appeared forced as they interacted with other diners. This discreet but discernible shift in their demeanor made Marcus's heart race with unease. "Marcus, are you listening?" Sarah's voice cut through his distracted thoughts, pulling him back to the conversation. "Yeah, sorry," Marcus said, shaking his head slightly as if to clear it. "It's just, I have this nagging feeling that we're not entirely welcome here." Sarah looked around, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What do you mean?" she asked. "The staff is avoiding us. I mean, sure, they seem a bit distant, but—" "No, it's more than that," Marcus interjected quietly. "I can't shake the feeling that they're uncomfortable serving a black man in a place like this." Sarah followed Marcus's gaze, and her confusion swiftly gave way to concern as she observed the staff's behavior more closely. Before she could articulate her thoughts, the uneasy atmosphere was shattered by the abrupt clatter of heavy boots on the wooden floor. Marcus's pulse quickened as two policemen, Officers Jenkins and Smith, strode deliberately toward their table. Their uniforms were crisp and imposing, adding to the sense of menace that seemed to envelop the room. Marcus felt a surge of dread wash over him as the officers approached, their presence intensifying the already palpable tension. "Excuse me," Officer Jenkins said abruptly, his tone sharp and commanding. "We need you to step outside. You're causing a disturbance." Marcus stared at him in disbelief. "Disturbance," he repeated, his voice tinged with incredulity. "We're just having dinner. There's been no disturbance." "There have been several complaints," Officer Smith interjected, folding his arms across his chest. His stance was firm, and his expression was stern. "You'll need to come with us." A rush of adrenaline surged through Marcus, his heart pounding as a mix of anger and bewilderment washed over him. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm a paying customer, and I haven't done anything wrong." "Is that so?" Officer Jenkins said, stepping closer and narrowing his gaze. "Let's see what's in your pockets. If you're not hiding anything, it should be no trouble." The restaurant fell silent as patrons turned their heads to watch. Marcus felt a deep flush of humiliation creep up his neck and face. He glanced at Sarah, who looked horrified, her eyes wide and her mouth slightly open in shock. "Is this necessary?" Sarah's voice quavered with a mixture of fear and frustration. "You're making a huge scene here." "Just comply," Officer Jenkins ordered, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. "We're not asking again." With a resigned sigh, Marcus stood up, his movements rigid with tension. He reached into his pockets, his hands shaking slightly as he retrieved his wallet, keys, and a small notebook. He placed each item carefully on the table, feeling the intense scrutiny of every pair of eyes in the restaurant. Each object seemed to symbolize a fragment of his dignity, laid bare for all to see. "See? Nothing, Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady despite the tremor of anger and humiliation. Just as I expected, Officer Smith said with a smug smirk. You think you can come in here, act like you're above the law, and not face any consequences. Enough. Sarah's voice cut through the tension with sharp clarity. You're abusing your power. This is completely unacceptable. The officers turned their gaze toward her, surprise and irritation flickering in their eyes. Mom, you should lower your voice, Officer Jenkins said, his tone dripping with patronizing condescension. This is a matter of law, and you're interfering. Sarah's face flushed with a mix of anger and determination, and Marcus could see she was ready to stand her ground. Marcus felt a powerful surge of anger coursing through him, a fierce determination igniting deep within his chest. This moment wasn't just a personal affront, it was emblematic of the broader injustices faced by countless others who had endured similar indignities. Yet, as he stood there, stripped of his dignity in front of a room full of onlookers, he felt an overwhelming sense of insignificance and helplessness. Let's go, Officer Jenkins commanded, his gaze fixed unyieldingly on Marcus. You're coming with us, whether you like it or not. Marcus took a deep breath as he stepped forward, trying to center himself amid the chaos. He understood that this confrontation was merely the beginning of a larger struggle. The world around him seemed to blur as he focused on the heavy burden of the injustice he had just experienced. A flicker of resolve ignited within him. He was determined not to let this moment define him, not now and not ever. When Marcus Wright finally pushed open the door to his apartment, the weight of the evening clung to him like a suffocating cloak. The air inside was filled with the comforting aroma of jasmine, a scent that had always been associated with his sister Jasmine. It was a sharp contrast to the bitter aftertaste of humiliation that lingered from the earlier incident at the restaurant. As he closed the door behind him, he leaned against it for a moment, trying to steady his racing thoughts. The echoes of laughter from the restaurant, the clinking of glasses, and the derisive tones of the officers still resonated in his mind. Marcus Jasmine's voice floated from the kitchen, tinged with concern. She appeared in the doorway, her brow furrowed in worry. You look like you've seen a ghost. He forced a smile that felt more like a grimace. Just a long night at work, he replied, though his words felt hollow and inadequate. He knew Jasmine could see through his attempt at a facade. Come sit down, she said gently, motioning toward the small dining table. You can tell me about it over some tea. Marcus nodded appreciatively, allowing himself to be guided to the table. He sank into a chair, feeling the cushions envelop him in a comforting embrace. Jasmine moved with practiced ease, preparing the kettle as steam began to rise. Her calm and fluid motions offered a small measure of solace as he took a deep breath, preparing to unburden himself. Jazz, something happened tonight, he began, his voice barely more than a whisper. I was out with Sarah at that new restaurant downtown and, well, it was awful. Jasmine's expression shifted to one of deep concern. What do you mean? What happened? He recounted the events of that evening with painstaking detail, the awkward hesitance of the restaurant staff as they served him, the abrupt and unwelcome arrival of Officers Jenkins and Smith, and the ensuing public humiliation that had followed. Each recollection felt like a heavy stone being dropped from his lips, laden with the weight of embarrassment and pain. They accused me of causing a disturbance, Jasmine, he said, his voice tight with the lingering sting of the experience. Right there, in front of everyone. I had to empty my pockets as if I were a common criminal caught in the act. Jasmine, her hands slightly shaking, carefully placed a steaming cup of tea in front of him. That's revolting, she said, her voice brimming with righteous anger. You did nothing wrong. You're a respected attorney with a sterling reputation. They had no right to treat you like that. No right at all. I know, he responded, his frustration bubbling beneath his controlled exterior. But it's not just about me. This kind of thing happens all the time. I felt utterly powerless, like there was nothing I could do to stop it. Jasmine sat down across from him, her eyes blazing with determination. "Marcus, you need to document this," she urged, her tone firm and resolute. "Start gathering evidence, speak to anyone who saw what happened. You cannot let them get away with this injustice." Marcus looked at her, a glimmer of hope beginning to spark within him. "Do you think that will make a difference?" he asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. "Absolutely," she affirmed, leaning forward with conviction. "This isn't just about you. You're standing up not just for yourself, but for everyone who has faced similar mistreatment. We need to make sure our voices are heard." Her words struck a chord deep within him, stirring a sense of resolve that he hadn't fully acknowledged until now. "All right," he said, nodding with newfound determination. "I'll do it. I'll reach out to local activists and see if they can offer support." As he spoke, he felt a wave of relief beginning to wash over him. Jasmine's passionate conviction had rekindled a spark within him that had dimmed in the wake of the evening's distressing events. They spent the next hour brainstorming strategies for gathering support and evidence, transforming the initial shock of the incident into a concrete plan of action. The following morning arrived bright and clear, but Marcus's heart bore the heavy burden of what lay ahead. As he walked through his neighborhood, he was met with a surprising outpouring of solidarity. Neighbors nodded in understanding, friends offered words of encouragement, and even strangers seemed to sense his plight. It felt as though the entire community was rallying behind him. Marcus called Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly woman from the neighborhood. "I heard about what happened. I'm so sorry. It's a disgrace. You know you're a good man." "Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins," he replied, his gratitude palpable. "Your support means more to me than you can imagine." Continuing on his way, Marcus noticed a group of young activists gathered in the local park, their voices animated as they discussed social justice issues. Hesitating only briefly, he approached them. "Hi, I'm Marcus," he said. "I could use some help." The group turned to him, their eyes filled with curiosity and empathy as he recounted his story. They responded with nods of understanding and words of encouragement, urging him to document his experience and amplify his voice in the fight against the injustice he had faced. In that moment, enveloped by a community that shared his pain and anger, Marcus felt a profound sense of purpose. Though the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, he was no longer alone. Together with his newfound allies, he was determined to illuminate the darkness that had marred his evening and countless other lives. Marcus Wright sat in the dimly lit office of Mr. Thompson, a renowned civil rights attorney whose reputation loomed large in Atlanta. The walls were lined with framed photographs, each capturing moments of triumphant justice and hard-fought victories. The room itself was saturated with a palpable sense of determination and resolve as Marcus recounted the distressing events from the restaurant. His voice was steady, yet it carried the weight of profound indignation. "I never imagined I'd find myself in a situation like that," Marcus confessed, his brow furrowing as he relived the sense of humiliation he had endured. "It felt as though I was being stripped of my identity, not just as a man, but as a professional. It was dehumanizing." Mr. Thompson leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled thoughtfully as he absorbed Marcus's account. "You've got to understand, Marcus," he said, his voice firm yet compassionate. "This goes beyond your personal experience. It's emblematic of the broader systemic issues that plague our society. We cannot let this pass unnoticed. The police need to be held accountable. And your case has the potential to be a pivotal moment in this struggle." Marcus's resolve flickered to life. "What do I need to do?" he asked, his voice steady with newfound determination. He was driven not just by a desire to seek justice for himself, but to stand up for those who had suffered in silence. "We need to start by gathering as much evidence as possible, Mr. Thompson instructed, his tone both firm and encouraging. "Witness statements, security footage, any documentation you can get your hands on. The more comprehensive our case, the stronger our position will be." As Marcus left the office, he felt an unfamiliar surge of purpose coursing through him. The world outside seemed different, brighter, yet more daunting. He knew he was stepping into a battle that would demand both courage and resilience, but for the first time since the incident, he felt a renewed sense of empowerment. Over the following days, Marcus threw himself into the task of collecting evidence. He contacted the restaurant for security footage and reached out to fellow diners who had witnessed the altercation. Each call served as a stark reminder of the injustice he had faced, but also as a step towards reclaiming his dignity. In a cozy cafe, he met with an older gentleman named Mr. Daniels, who had been present at the restaurant that night. "Mr. Right. I saw what happened, Mr. Daniels said, his voice heavy with empathy. "It was appalling. You didn't deserve that. I'll provide a statement." Marcus nodded gratefully, feeling a swell of appreciation for the support. "Thank you, sir. Your support means a lot to me." As days turned into weeks, the evidence began to accumulate. Marcus found himself poring over the footage, reliving the moments of humiliation. Yet amid the emotional strain, he found hope in the faces of those who supported him. Each witness expressed their anger, disbelief, and determination to see justice served. Then came the breakthrough. While reviewing the collected evidence, Marcus discovered reports detailing Officer Jenkins' history of complaints, numerous allegations of excessive force, and racial profiling. The revelation sent a chill down his spine, igniting a fierce resolve within him. This wasn't merely about his case, it was about exposing a pattern of abuse that needed to be addressed. "Mr. Thompson, you need to see this," Marcus exclaimed, rushing back to the attorney's office. He laid the documents on the desk, his hands trembling with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Mr. Thompson examined the reports, his expression turning grave. "This changes everything, Mr. Thompson said, his voice low but resolute. "If we can demonstrate that Jenkins has a history of misconduct, it significantly strengthens our case. We're not just fighting for one man's dignity anymore, we're challenging a culture of racism within the police force." Marcus felt a surge of adrenaline. "Then we have to go all in. I won't stop until there's accountability." "Precisely, Mr. Thompson replied, his voice steady with resolve. "We'll prepare for the fight of our lives. You have the community's support, and together we can make a meaningful difference." As Marcus left the office that day, the weight of the world seemed a little lighter. Though the path ahead was fraught with challenges, he no longer felt isolated. The community was rallying behind him, and with each witness statement and piece of evidence, he was not just reclaiming his dignity, he was igniting a justice movement. He was prepared to take a stand not only for himself, but for all those who had faced similar struggles, their voices rising in a chorus of resilience and hope. As the sun dipped below the Atlantis skyline, casting elongated shadows that stretched across the city, the air seemed charged with a palpable tension, crackling like static electricity. Marcus Wright stood at the podium, his heart racing with every beat as he faced an ocean of reporters. The flickering flashes of cameras cut through the gathering dusk like bolts of lightning. The police department had called this press conference in a frantic effort to undermine his claims, but Marcus was resolute in his mission to shift the narrative in his favor. "Thank you all for coming," Marcus began, his voice unwavering despite the tempest roiling inside him. He stole a glance at the officers flanking the police chief, their postures rigid and their expressions laced with a blend of arrogance and disdain. "Today I am not just standing here as an individual wronged, but as a voice for many who have suffered under systemic racism and injustice within our community." A low murmur rippled through the crowd, and Marcus noticed the skepticism etched on several faces. Nonetheless, he continued with unyielding resolve. On that night, I was subjected to an unjust public humiliation, unjustly branded as suspect. My dignity was stripped away by those who were supposed to protect us. This isn't merely about my personal experience, it's emblematic of the broader, systemic issues that plague our society. As he spoke, the weight of his family's and community's expectations bore down on him, fueling his determination. Jasmine's impassioned words of encouragement resonated in his mind, fortifying his resolve. We demand accountability. We demand transparency. The actions of Officer Jenkins and Officer Smith reflect a deep-seated issue that needs addressing. They are not just representatives of law enforcement, they are individuals who must be held accountable for their actions. A reporter raised her hand, her voice slicing through the heavy atmosphere. "Mr. Wright, do you have evidence to support your allegations?" The police chief has claimed that the officers acted within their authority during the incident. Marcus took a steadying breath, feeling the weight of public scrutiny upon him. "Yes, I do," he answered, reaching into his briefcase to retrieve a folder brimming with witness statements and security footage screenshots. "I have collected testimonies from patrons who observed the degradation I endured. Additionally, I possess video evidence demonstrating that the officers had no legitimate grounds for their actions that night." The reporters leaned in, their attention sharpening as they began to grasp the seriousness of his claims. Marcus could see the shift in their demeanor, an indication that the gravity of his words was sinking in. This incident is not an anomaly, it is part of a larger, troubling pattern that demands our attention. The community deserves to know the truth, and we must expose it. From the back of the room, a voice called out, challenging him. "Why should anyone believe you? You're just another disgruntled citizen looking for a payout." The crowd shifted, and Marcus identified the voice as belonging to a local journalist notorious for sensationalism. Unfazed, Marcus stood tall, locking eyes with the journalist. "Because I am not fighting only for myself. I am standing up for every individual who has experienced the sting of discrimination. I am advocating for justice not just in this case, but for the multitude of others who have been silenced and overlooked." As he spoke, Marcus sensed a shift in the room's energy. Heads began nodding, whispers spread among the audience. It was as though his words had sparked a collective awakening, igniting a flame of solidarity. The growing support among the crowd filled him with a renewed sense of hope. After the press conference concluded and Marcus stepped away from the podium, he was approached by a group of activists with whom he had been in contact. "Marcus, that was incredibly moving," said Lisa, one of the activists, her voice filled with admiration. "You spoke with conviction, and it resonated with many. We're behind you all the way." "Thank you," Marcus replied, his voice thick with emotion. "My only aim is to ensure that what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else." As they began to strategize and discuss their next steps, Marcus felt a surge of solidarity and determination. The fight was far from over, but for the first time he felt that the tide was beginning to turn in his favor. Just as Marcus and his allies were starting to plan their next steps, his phone buzzed insistently in his pocket. He fished it out, and his heart sank as he read the ominous, anonymous message, "Back off or face the consequences." The words hit him like a physical blow, but he quickly steadied himself, forcing down the initial wave of fear. He looked at Lisa and the others, the determination in his eyes unwavering. "They think they can intimidate me into silence," Marcus declared with a fierce resolve. "But I won't back down. Not now, not ever." Lisa placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Good," she said firmly. "We're all in this together. You're not alone in this fight." As his friends and supporters rallied around him, Marcus felt an unshakable sense of purpose. Despite the threats that loomed, he was bolstered by the strength and solidarity of his community. He was ready to confront whatever challenges lay ahead, driven by a steadfast belief in the eventual triumph of justice. The room hummed with a charged anticipation as Marcus Wright stood at the front of the community center, his heart racing with a mixture of anxiety and resolve. The pale yellow walls, decorated with posters advocating for justice and equality, seemed almost to mock the gravity of the situation. This meeting was more than just a gathering, it was a critical opportunity to hold Officer Jenkins accountable for the public humiliation Marcus had endured. "Thank you all for coming," Marcus began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I know this isn't easy, but we need to address what happened to me that night at the restaurant. I refuse to let this injustice go unchallenged." The audience was a blend of familiar faces, friends, family, and community leaders, each carrying their own experiences of injustice and adversity. As Marcus scanned the room, his gaze landed on his sister Jasmine, who gave him an encouraging nod. He drew a deep breath, bracing himself for the difficult confrontation that lay ahead. At that moment, Officer Jenkins entered the room, flanked by several of his colleagues. The tension in the air intensified as murmurs of discontent rippled through the crowd. Jenkins wore a self-satisfied smirk, as if he was prepared to dismiss Marcus's grievances with ease. Marcus felt a surge of anger but managed to maintain his composure. "Officer Jenkins," Marcus called out, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "I need an explanation for your actions that night. Why did you single me out?" Jenkins crossed his arms, a smug expression on his face. "You were causing a disturbance, mister." "Right. The staff called us. Do you think you're above the law just because you're well-dressed?" The crowd erupted in an uproar, voices rising in outrage. "That's not true," shouted an elderly woman from the back of the room. Before Marcus could respond, Officer Ramirez, a colleague of Jenkins, stepped forward unexpectedly. "That's not how it went down," Jenkins Ramirez said firmly, his voice resolute. "I was there that night. Marcus was simply having dinner. You made a mistake." Gasps of surprise filled the room as all eyes turned to Ramirez. Jenkins's expression darkened with a mix of disbelief and anger. "You don't know what you're talking about, Ramirez. You're going to regret this." "No." Jenkins Ramirez shot back, his voice gaining strength. "You're the one who should be worried. This isn't just about one incident anymore. It's about holding people accountable." Marcus felt a surge of hope as Ramirez's words resonated with the crowd. Encouraged by the unexpected support, he stepped forward with renewed determination. "This is exactly what we need, officers who are willing to stand up against corruption and racism. We will not be silenced." The scrutiny from the community grew ever more intense, and Marcus seized the moment. If what happened to him could occur to anyone, then it was crucial to hold these officers accountable, not just for his sake, but for all those who had faced similar injustices. As he spoke, the room erupted in applause, the sound echoing off the walls with a fervor that marked a turning point. Marcus noticed the news cameras, which had previously been passively recording the meeting, now focusing intently on the scene, capturing this pivotal moment that could potentially drive significant change. As the meeting concluded and Marcus walked out, he felt a surge of renewed purpose. The media buzzed with coverage of Ramirez's compelling statements and the growing public support for his case. Jasmine, walking beside him, echoed his newfound resolve. "This is just the beginning," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "You have the community behind you now. They won't let this go." Marcus smiled, the tension that had been gripping him easing as he replied, "That's the power of truth. We're not just fighting for me anymore, we're fighting for everyone who has been wronged the day it shifted something profound within him." With Ramirez's unexpected backing and the community's support, Marcus felt a decisive shift. He was prepared to confront the challenges ahead, no longer as a solitary figure, but as a key part of a movement toward justice. His phone buzzed incessantly with notifications, each ping a reminder that his story was gaining momentum and that the possibility of real change was on the horizon. As he and Jasmine approached their car, Marcus glanced back at the community center, a venue that had evolved from a mere meeting space into a battleground for justice. The struggle was far from over, but for the first time since that fateful night, he felt a glimmer of hope. The courtroom was charged with palpable tension as Marcus Wright sat at the plaintiff's table, a cocktail of anticipation and anxiety coursing through him. He stole a glance at Mr. Thompson, who was beside him, meticulously flipping through their well-prepared case file. The air in the room was heavy with expectation, not just for Marcus, but for the entire community that had rallied behind him. They were primed and ready for justice, eager for a reckoning. "Your Honor, Mr." Thompson began, his voice steady and authoritative, commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "We are here today to present evidence that not only supports my client's claims, but also highlights a troubling pattern of systemic misconduct within the police department." His words reverberated through the courtroom, capturing the keen interest of everyone present, including the reporters at the back, their notepads ready for the next big scoop. Marcus felt a surge of determination as he watched the prosecutor call Officer Smith to the stand. The officer appeared stiff and uneasy, his eyes darting nervously around the room. "Officer Smith, Mr." Thompson began. "Can you recount the events of that night at the restaurant?" Yes," Smith replied, his voice betraying his nervousness. "We were called to the scene because there was a disturbance. I approached Mr. Wright." "Excuse me, Mr." Thompson interjected, leaning forward with a piercing gaze. "Is it true that you were the first to accuse Mr. Wright of causing this disturbance without any concrete evidence?" Smith hesitated under the intense scrutiny of the courtroom, the weight of public opinion pressing heavily upon him. "Well, we felt there was something off," he admitted, his voice wavering. "Something off," Marcus interjected, his frustration boiling over. "You mean that I was black, dining in a predominantly white establishment? Is that what you found off?" A murmur of shock rippled through the courtroom, and the judge's gavel came down sharply. "Mr. Wright, please allow the witness to respond," the judge commanded, his tone stern. Marcus could feel the gallery's eyes on him, some filled with support, others with disbelief as his heart pounded in his chest. Before Smith could offer a response, Mr. Thompson presented a critical piece of evidence: the restaurant's security footage. The screen flickered to life, showing Marcus and Sarah engaged in a calm, friendly conversation, and the police officers approaching with an unmistakable air of hostility. The footage starkly contrasted the officers' claims there was no visible disturbance, only a serene dinner abruptly interrupted by unwarranted aggression. "Your Honor, Mr." Thompson said, gesturing toward the screen. "This footage speaks volumes. Officer Smith, can you reconcile this evidence with your testimony?" Smith's face drained of color as he struggled to articulate a coherent response. I made a mistake, I thought." "Thought what, Mr.?" Thompson pressed, his voice rising with intensity. "That a black man dining peacefully could only be up to no good." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs of support for Marcus. The atmosphere shifted noticeably, as if a collective resolve had taken root. Marcus exchanged a meaningful glance with Jasmine, who sat in the front row, her eyes reflecting pride and encouragement. As the trial moved forward, the tension intensified when Mr. Thompson called Officer Jenkins to the stand. The moment Jenkins entered the courtroom, a palpable shift occurred. Marcus's heart raced as he recalled the humiliation he had endured at Jenkins's hands. Jenkins appeared defiant, but there were visible cracks in his demeanor. "Officer Jenkins, Mr. Thompson began, his tone firm. "Can you explain why you've been involved in multiple misconduct cases before this incident?" "I've never been formally charged with anything," Jenkins replied, his bravado beginning to falter. "Is that so, Mr.?" Thompson countered, producing a comprehensive dossier of previous complaints against Jenkins. Here are testimonies from multiple individuals who have faced similar mistreatment at your hands. Care to revise your statement? Jenkins's composure crumbled as the mounting evidence began to overwhelm him. These are just accusations, he protested, desperation creeping into his voice. No, Officer Marcus said, rising from his seat with unwavering resolve. These are truths that have been concealed for far too long. It's time for accountability. The jury listened intently as the evidence continued to unfold, painting a damning portrait of Jenkins's misconduct. The moment of reckoning arrived when the jury returned with their verdict. The foreman stood, his voice clear and resolute. We find in favor of the plaintiff, Marcus Wright. A wave of emotion surged through Marcus as the courtroom erupted into applause. He felt an overwhelming sense of victory, not just for himself, but for all who had endured similar injustices. With tears of relief and triumph in his eyes, he stood tall, knowing that change was not only possible but was beginning to take root in their community. As we wrap up today's compelling journey, let's reflect on the powerful story of Marcus Wright and his fight for justice. From the initial scrutiny to the courtroom drama, we've seen how determination, community support, and the pursuit of truth can lead to profound change. What have you learned from this story? How has it impacted your perspective on standing up for what's right? We'd love to hear from you. Share one key takeaway or lesson you plan to apply in your own life in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comment and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more impactful stories and updates. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.